Today we're going to begin the cardiovascular system. We're going to begin with talking about the role of blood in the body. Humans have a closed circulatory system, and the blood is repeatedly cycled throughout the body. Here's a test question. It was 1628, and there was an English physician named William Harvey, and he showed that blood circulated throughout the body in one-way vessels. The blood is the body's internal transportation system. The blood is pumped by the heart and travels through a network of vessels, and it carries materials such as oxygen, nutrients, hormones, and waste products from each of the 100 trillion cells in the human body. The cardiovascular system is made up of the blood, the heart, and the blood vessels. The blood is a fluid or liquid connective tissue. It's a transport medium of the cardiovascular system. The two main functions of the blood are to transport nutrients and oxygen to the cells and carry carbon dioxide and waste products away from the cells. Blood also transfers heat to the body surface and plays a role in defending the body against disease. The main function of the cardiovascular system is to transport material in a fluid medium throughout the body. The blood is made up of liquid plasma, that's about 55%, and blood solids, that's the remaining 45%. The five actual functions is to transport 1 nutrients, 2 dissolved gases, carbon dioxide and oxygen, 3 enzymes, 4 hormones, and 5 waste products. The blood also regulates body temperature, pH, and electrolytes. And finally, it protects the body from foreign invaders, and it restricts the loss of fluid. Our bodies on average contain about 4 to 5.5 liters of blood. This shows you the distribution of products in the blood. The plasma, 55%, the white blood cells, platelets, and red blood cells make up the other 45%. The red blood cells are also called RBCs or erythrocytes. They're the most numerous blood cells. 1 microliter contains approximately 5 million red blood cells. Red blood cells are produced from the bone marrow, and they're gradually filled with hemoglobin, which forces out the nucleus and other organelles. Mature red blood cells don't have a nucleus. Remember that, that's a test question, and organelles. Hemoglobin is a membrane sac, and it holds the oxygen. Hemoglobin is the iron-containing protein that gives the red blood cells the ability to carry oxygen, and it also gives the red blood cells their color, in this case red. Red blood cells only stay in circulation for about 120 days before they're destroyed by special white blood cells in the liver and spleen. Red blood cells in your body are dying out and being replaced at about 2 million per second. That's about 6 billion in a 50-minute period. Here you see the difference between the red blood cells and white blood cells. White blood cells are also called WBCs or leukocytes. They're outnumbered by the red blood cells almost 500 to 1. They're produced in the red bone marrow, the lymph nodes, and the spleen. They tend to be larger than the red blood cells, and they're almost colorless. They do not contain hemoglobin. White blood cells have a nucleus and can live for many months or years. The main function of the white blood cells is to protect the body against invasion by foreign cells or substances. The white blood cells are also called phagocytes, that means big eater, and they destroy bacteria and foreign cells by engulfing and digesting them. Some produce special proteins called antibodies, and that helps the body fight off disease and resist infection. Doctors are able to detect the presence of infection by counting the number of white blood cells in the blood. When a person has an infection, the number of white blood cells are usually doubled. This is just a picture showing you the types of white blood cells: lymphocytes, monocytes, and eosinophils. Now we go into platelets. Platelets are involved in blood clotting. Platelets are not cells, they're tiny fragments of other cells that are formed in the bone marrow. Platelets are formed from small pieces of cytoplasm that are pinched off. They're called megakaryocytes, and they're found in the bone marrow. Platelets lack a nucleus, and their lifespan is only 7 to 11 days. Platelets play an important role in blood clotting. Platelets help the process by clumping together and forming a plug at a site of a wound and then releasing proteins called clotting factors. Clotting factors start a series of chemical reactions that ends with a sticky meshwork of fibrin filaments. The genetic disorder of clotting factors is called hemophilia. This is where people bleed uncontrollably, even from a small cut or scrape. Clotting of blood in the vessels can block the flow of blood. If this happens in the brain cells may die, and that's called a stroke. In the heart, it would be a heart attack. In other areas, it would be called a thrombosis and lead to necrosis, which would be cell death or tissue death. Here we see the red blood cell and the platelets. Blood types. Blood types are determined by a type of antigen present on the surface of the red blood cell. An antigen is a protein or carbohydrate that acts as a signal. It enables the body to recognize foreign substances in the body. Blood in humans are classified into 4 groups. An individual's red blood cell may carry antigen A, antigen B, both antigen A and B, or no antigen at all, and we call those O. So the blood types are A, B, AB, or O. Make sure you know that. AB is known as the universal receiver. That means they can receive any blood type. Type O is known as the universal donor, meaning they can donate blood to anyone. The ABO system is based on the AB antigen, and it's a means of classifying the blood by the antigens located on the surface of the red blood cell and the antibodies circulating in the plasma. Now let's begin the anatomy and functions of the human heart. The heart is the central organ of the cardiovascular system. The heart is a hollow, muscular organ that contracts at regular intervals, forcing blood throughout the body. The heart is cone-shaped. It's about the size of a fist, and it's located in the thoracic cavity between the lungs, behind the sternum, or the breastbone. The heart is tilted so that the apex is pointed. The pointed end, is oriented to the left. The walls of the heart are made up of 3 layers of tissue. The outer and inner layers are epithelial tissue, and the middle layer is myocardium, or heart muscle, or the cardiac muscle. It is not under conscious control of the nervous system. The cardiac muscle tissue has a rich supply of blood, which ensures that it gets plenty of oxygen. There's also a special connection between the cells that allow impulses to travel from one cell to the other. The cells that make up the cardiac muscle tissue are loaded with mitochondria. This guarantees that each cell has a constant supply of energy. Our heart contracts or beats about once every second of every day of our lives. The heart beats more than 4.5 billion times in the average lifespan. The only time the heart gets rest is in between beats. Here's an illustration of the heart and showing you the blood circulation. The heart can be thought of as 2 pumps sitting side by side. The human heart has a right atrium and a right ventricle, as well as a left atrium and left ventricle, and essentially 2 separate hearts inside one. Let's go over pulmonary circulation first. The right side of the heart pumps blood from the body to the lungs. Where oxygen-poor blood or deoxygenated blood is usually shown in blue and gives up carbon dioxide and picks up oxygen. There's something called systemic circulation, that's the left side of the heart, and that pumps oxygen-rich blood, usually shown in red, from the lungs to the rest of the body. The heart is enclosed by a protective membrane sac called the pericardium, and it surrounds the heart and secretes a fluid that reduces friction as the heart beats. Our heart has 4 chambers. The upper chambers of the heart are called the atria, the right and left atria or atrium. They receive blood coming into the heart. The lower chambers, the right and left ventricles, pump blood out of the heart. The left ventricle is the thickest chamber of the heart because it has to do most of the work to pump the blood to all the parts of the body. Vertically, there is an area called the septum, and it divides the right and left sides of the heart. It's a common wall. The septum prevents the mixing of oxygen-poor and oxygen-rich blood. The right side of the heart deals with pulmonary circulation. The oxygen-poor blood from the heart enters the right side of the heart through two large blood vessels called vena cava. Vena cava empty into the right atrium when the heart relaxes between beats. The pressure in the circulatory causes the atria to fill with blood. When the heart contracts, the blood is squeezed from the right atrium into the right ventricle. The valve that separates the two areas is called the tricuspid valve. The specific purpose of the tricuspid valve is to prevent backflow of blood. Arteries tend to carry blood away from the heart. Remember, away. Veins carry blood to the heart. And when the heart contracts a second time, the blood in the right ventricle is sent through the semilunar valve, known as the pulmonary valve, into the pulmonary arteries to the lungs. These are the only arteries that carry oxygen-poor blood. The left side of the heart deals with systemic circulation. Oxygen-rich blood leaves the lungs and returns to the heart by the way of the blood vessels called pulmonary veins. These are the only veins that carry oxygen-rich blood. The returning blood enters the left atrium. It passes through the flaps of tissue called the atrioventricular valve or the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. It's also called the mitral valve. So it has three names: atrioventricular valve, bicuspid valve, or mitral valve, and it goes from the left atrium through the valve to the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, the blood is pumped through the aortic valve into the aorta, which is the largest artery that carries it to every part of the body except the lungs. At the base of the aorta is the aortic valve, and that prevents backflow into the left ventricle. Here we see the blood flow, both pulmonary circulation and systemic circulation, and you could see the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Here's a picture of the blood flow conceptually. 1, blood from the body. 2, right atrium. 3, tricuspid valve. 4, right ventricle. 5, to the lungs. There we have gas exchange, and that completes pulmonary circulation. Now we begin systemic circulation. Return from the lungs, which is 6, 7, left atrium, 8, mitral valve, 9, left ventricle, 10, out the aorta, 11, to the body. This is a conceptual diagram of blood flow. Now we're going to cover the heartbeat or cardiac cycle. The cardiac cycle is a sequence of two events in one heartbeat. The cardiac cycle is a simultaneous contraction of the two atria followed a fraction of a second later by the simultaneous contraction of the two ventricles. The heartbeat has two phases. Phase 1 is called systole. That's the term for the contraction. And it's the contraction of the ventricles which pump the blood into the two major vessels leaving the heart. Diastole is a term for relaxation, and it occurs when the ventricles relax, allowing the back pressure to drop in the vessels. The cardiac cycle also creates heart sounds. Each heartbeat produces two sounds called lub-dub that can be heard with a stethoscope. The first sound is the loudest and longest, caused by ventricular systole or contraction and the closing of the atrioventricular valves. The second is caused by the closure of the aortic and pulmonary valves. If the valves do not close properly, an extra sound is heard, and it's called a murmur. Although the heart is a single muscle, it does not contract in a single motion. It spreads over the heart like a wave. The wave begins in the small bundle of specialized muscle cells in the right atrium called the SA node or sinoatrial node. The SA node is the natural pacemaker of the heart. It initiates each heartbeat and sets the pace for the heart rate. The heart does not require stimulation from the nervous system. However, the autonomic nervous system does influence the heart rate. The sympathetic nervous system increases the heart rate. We talked about that with fight or flight. And the parasympathetic nervous system decreases the heart rate through relaxation and rest. For most of us, at rest, our heartbeat beats between 60 and 80 beats per minute. During exercise, that can increase to as many as 200 beats per minute. Let's begin with the blood vessels. There are 3 blood vessels we're going to talk about: arteries, capillaries, and veins. The blood vessels of the cardiovascular system are the arteries, capillaries, and veins. With the exception of capillaries, the blood vessels have walls made of 3 layers of tissue. This tissue gives them a combination of strength and elasticity. The inner layer is called the tunica interna, the middle layer is called the tunica media, and the outer layer is the tunica externa. Remember, arteries away. They tend to be thicker, deeper in the body, and under pressure. Arteries carry blood away from the heart to the rest of the body. The walls of the artery are thicker than those of the veins, and the smallest arteries are called arterioles. In between the arteries and the veins are called capillaries. They're the smallest blood vessels without a true membrane covering, and this allows diffusion. This is where gas exchange takes place, carbon dioxide and oxygen. Veins form a system that collects the blood from every part of the body and carries it back to the heart. They have cusps that keep the blood from flowing in one direction. This is from the body's exhibit, and it's showing you all the blood vessels of the human body. Again, we'll get to see the arteries here, the capillaries, and the veins, and we're able to see where the gas exchange takes place. Blood pressure is a measure of force that exerts against the vessel wall. Blood pressure is maintained in 2 ways: the nervous system, which can speed up or slow down the heart rate, and the kidneys, which allows blood pressure by the amount of fluid in our blood. Both high and low blood pressure can cause our body's problems. To measure our blood pressure, we usually use a cuff, and the cuff is inflated around the person's arm, stopping the blood flow through the artery. The air pressure in the cuff is slowly released, and the first sounds of the blood passing through the artery means that the ventricles have to pump with enough force to overcome the pressure exerted by the cuff. This measurement is known as systolic pressure, or the pressure of the blood when it leaves the ventricles. Normal pressure is 120 millimeters of mercury for males and 110 millimeters of mercury for females. Actually, they've dropped it. It's usually about 110 over 80, 110 over 70. The air pressure is continued to be released, listening for the disappearance of the sound, which indicates a steady flow of blood. This is known as the diastolic pressure, or the pressure of the blood is sufficient to keep the arteries open constantly, even when the ventricles relax. Again, normal blood pressure is about 80 millimeters of mercury for males and 70 millimeters of mercury for females. Your blood pressure is given is systolic number over diastolic number. They used to say 120 over 80 is normal. Today they're saying that's a little bit high. It should be about 110 over 70. Heart disease. About 12 million people die each year from heart disease. High blood pressure is one of the major causes of all heart diseases, about 50%. The U.S. spends large amounts of money yearly treating heart disease, $274 billion. 70% of all heart attack victims are connected with smoking. There are about 3,000 teen smokers daily. Here's the risk factors for heart disease: high cholesterol levels, lack of exercise, smoking, high-fat diet, not enough fiber in foods, too much stress, high blood pressure, and obesity. Here, a clot can stop blood flow, which prevents oxygen getting to the tissue. And here we see the tissue area that's affected from the lack of blood flow. Plaque buildup can also cause a lack of blood flow, which can again lead to lack of oxygen, which can lead to a heart attack. Here we see an illustration of atherosclerosis. The first picture shows the normal artery. The second is mild atherosclerosis with a decreased blood flow. And finally, severe atherosclerosis, which shows you the least blood flow. That would be the largest potential for a heart attack. Cardiovascular disease can be caused by fatty deposits in the cell linings of the walls of your arteries. They obstruct blood flow. A heart attack is called myocardial infarction. This occurs when the artery supplying the heart with blood carrying oxygen and nutrients suddenly becomes blocked, causing a part of the heart muscle to die. Symptoms of a heart attack include chest pain, sharp pain down the left arm due to the left ventricle, we call it referred pain, shortness of breath, sweating, lightheaded, dizzy, fainting, dry mouth, anxiety, feeling of impending doom. An EKG is the electrical readings of the heart. They usually will take it. An echocardiogram is similar, but it's using sound waves, and blood tests from regular doctor's visits can tell you cholesterol levels and triglyceride levels. All these are tools to help you diagnose and hopefully prevent heart disease.